Meet our MC Kim Jin-ho, a professional fighter that is so strong he wins a streak of 37 fights with 100% knockouts. Just to ease his boredom, he even played the hardest game called Last Savior for the past years without missing a single day just to find a thrill. As he faces the last boss demon, King Izar, he finds its pattern simple and is about to beat it. As he prepares to strike the final blow, he wishes it not to end. However, as he unleashed his final move, the Demon King's life ended. And that's how he became the champion of two worlds. Throwing the mouse out of frustration, he wonders who he should fight next. He even considers fighting an angry bear. But suddenly lightning struck his apartment, and that's how his life took an interesting turn. Slowly, he regained consciousness, his body feeling dizzy and burning. Then, he heard someone calling him, 218, repeatedly. He opened his eyes, feeling the rain hitting his body, and wondered when he had even come outside. Suddenly, someone grabbed his shoulder, shouting at him, which took him by surprise. The man urgently asked what he was doing and why he hadn't responded earlier. There was no time to waste. They had to get out of there immediately. Jin-ho, still dazed, asked the man who he was. He noticed the number 172 on the man's uniform. Looking around, he saw people dressed in orange running toward a gate with a flag bearing an eagle symbol. Recognizing the symbol, he tried to recall where he had seen it before. 172 shouted to him that today might be their last chance, their final opportunity to escape the loathsome Carry-On. Jin-ho was shocked by the name and asked in disbelief if this place was really called Carry-On. 172 shouts that there is no time to dawdle and urges him to move quickly, but he remains still, unable to believe what is happening. He wonders if he is dreaming. As he watches the prisoners pulling at the gate, nearly dragging it open, he begins to realize that this is not a dream. He can feel everything around him, making him question whether he has been sucked into the game he was playing, as a prisoner. He knows that there are too many unanswered questions, but escaping must come first. He shouts for 172 to wait a minute, but 172 calls him a lunatic and tells him to cut it out. Ignoring the insult, he asks 172 if something about this situation doesn't seem odd. He reminds him that if this were really Carrion, it shouldn't be like this. It's far too sloppy. 172 quickly explains that it's because Chief Clark isn't here. Confused, he hesitates, but 172 shouts again, saying that Clark left in a hurry earlier, so now is their chance. He urges him to pull himself together and escape. Instead of running, he grabs 172's clothes and pulls him back just as the other prisoners rush toward the gate. 172 screams in shock and shouts at him, demanding to know what he is doing. He remains silent, knowing that if what 172 says is true, the situation makes sense. However, his champion's instincts tell him that they must never cross that door. 172 struggles, trying to push his hand away, yelling at him to let go, but he doesn't. Suddenly, one of the prisoners excitedly shouts that the door is opening, believing they are free. A wave of prisoners surges forward, laughing as they run toward their supposed freedom. Then, blood splatters everywhere. A prisoner's arm is severed. The prisoners freeze in shock as Chief Clark appears with a squad of soldiers. A wide grin spreads across Clark's face as he calls them bastards. Without hesitation, he orders his soldiers to kill every prisoner attempting to escape. 172 stares in horror and asks why Clark is here, but before he can answer, he shouts at 172 to shut up and run. Without thinking, 172 follows his lead while the prisoners desperately retreat, some being slaughtered before they can even turn back. Moments later, silence falls over the prison. Clark steps inside and orders the soldiers to line up the remaining prisoners. Immediately, the soldiers bark commands, forcing the survivors to stand straight in front of the corpses of their fellow inmates. 172 looks down at the lifeless bodies and can no longer hold back. He vomits helplessly. A soldier notices and immediately kicks him in the stomach, shouting that he must not move. 172 coughs in pain as the soldier warns everyone that any movement will result in death. Looking at the armed men surrounding them, he realizes that these soldiers are no stronger than children, and another massacre could break out at any moment. If it does, he knows he will have no choice but to fight. Clark stops in front of him, smirking, and tells him that he is lucky. He mockingly asks if he doesn't even have the courage to run. Clark then sneers, saying that magicians are nothing but cowards, and just the thought of being their rival is humiliating. Leaning in closer, Clark calls him by name, Arahan, and warns him that he will regret not dying today. He walks away, reminding him to expect it. Jin-ho stares at his reflection in the puddle beneath him, the water mixed with blood. He wonders if that is truly his name. 1 week later, the only routine in the camp is stacking stone towers, a meaningless task designed solely to torment the prisoners. After several days of living there, he learns a few things about his new body. It is frail and weak, so feeble that he is completely winded from lifting a single stone. His body is about 15 years old. At night, he secretly tries to use magic, remembering that he was a magician, but no matter how hard he tries, he gets no results. He thinks it is strange that Arahan cannot use magic when the Arahan family is renowned for producing the best magicians. It makes no sense that he lacks magic, but he realizes that this must be the reason he was abandoned here. The Arahan family has plenty to spare after all. The soldier guarding them orders him to move the stone tower to the other side and questions why he is dawdling. When he doesn't respond, the soldier demands to know why he isn't moving. Remaining silent, he lifts the stone and carries it to the other side. Looking up, he sees a panel displaying that synchronization is in progress. It is clogged with excessive data, and currently at 78%, making him wonder when it will ever finish. A moment later, it is breakfast time. The prisoners head to the poor and messy kitchen area. He stares at the piece of bread and unflavored soup, sighing in frustration. Since arriving here, he has been exercising regularly, yet his progress is stagnant due to the inadequate food. 172 notices and asks if he is skipping breakfast again. Instead of answering, he hands his bread to 172, who happily accepts it. Watching him eat, he thinks that while all the other prisoners avoid him, 172 is different. Truly something else. In the ultimate mage lineage of Arahan, there is a rumor about Arahan's signature red eyes. It is said that these red eyes are a curse, earned by taking too many lives. People believe that encountering those eyes guarantees death. He knows that 172 is around his age, and that they even share the same cell. He assumes they were on friendly terms before his possession, though he has no memories of it. However, he wonders why someone as young as 172 is in the Carrion Detention Center. 172 then warns him to be careful these days. Confused, he asks what he means. 172 explains that, because of him, the workload has increased, and the other prisoners are getting agitated. He advises him to take it easy. He finally understands why all the prisoners seem so full of life lately. Lowering his voice, 172 whispers for him to be especially cautious of number 589, the prisoner's leader. He reveals that 589 was well known in the arena and ended up here for killing people. He asks 172 if it wouldn't be dangerous for him to associate with him under those circumstances. 172 responds that he has grown fond of him and can't just ignore the situation. He stands up and acknowledges 172's concern, but tells him that he is in the way and should leave. 172, confused, asks what he is suddenly talking about. Before he can answer, they hear footsteps approaching. He turns toward the sound, telling 172 that the thing he was worried about is about to happen. At first, 172 is confused. Then, his expression shifts to shock and horror as he sees 589 approaching with a group of angry prisoners. 589 calls out to him, stating that the reason their workload has increased is because of him. Unfazed, he arrogantly responds, "So what?" and adds that if that's the case, he might as well use it as a workout. Without warning, 589 throws a punch, striking him in the face. 172 jumps to his feet in shock and calls out to him in concern. But before 589 can press his advantage, he grabs 589 by the collar and, with a smile, lifts his knee and strikes 589 in the chin. The impact leaves 172 and the other prisoners stunned in disbelief. Yet, to his surprise, 589 simply looks at him and asks what he is doing. He realizes with shock that none of his attacks are working at all. He wonders just how weak he has become. 589 grabs him by the collar and lifts him effortlessly with one hand. With overwhelming force, 589 throws him against the wall. 172 calls out to him in worry, but 589 ignores him, scanning the area and demanding to know where that rat-like wretch went. He declares that he is dead today. As he lies on the ground, the panel suddenly appears in front of him, displaying a notification. Synchronization complete. A smirk forms on his lips. He then stands up as his real-life strength sinks into Arahan's entire body. Opening and closing his palm, he jumps repeatedly, feeling his body. He then assumes a boxing stance and teasingly tells 589 that they should pick up where they left off. 589 laughs and mocks him, asking what on earth their so-called young master is so full of himself about when even his own clan abandoned him. However, he simply tells 589 to shut up and get in there quickly. Teasingly, he asks if 589 is scared. Infuriated, 589 charges at him, shouting that he will kill him just as he wishes. Seeing 589 closing in, he swings his foot in a kick, but he is caught off guard when 589 grabs it. 589 sneers, telling him that he will learn his place. But before 589 can act, he forcefully turns his body and kicks 589 in the head with his other foot. 589 is startled and momentarily dizzy while he lands safely on the ground. Before 589 can recover, he launches another kick, striking 589 under the chin. 589 coughs up blood, but before he can collapse, he jumps again, kicking with another devastating strike. The impact sends 589 stumbling backward before he collapses onto the ground. He then looks down at him and states that this is why he tried not to use his legs. 589's minions rush toward him with knives, shouting that they will make him die in agonizing pain. Unfazed, he calmly walks closer to 589, places his foot on his back, and loudly orders the other prisoners not to move. Everyone is shocked as they watch him tightly twist 589's arms backward. He warns them that if they come any closer, he will leave 589 begging for food for the rest of his life. If they don't like it, they can bring the warden. The prisoners remain silent, watching him cautiously. He asks if they think this is a joke and if they don't believe him. To prove his point, he pulls 589's arms a little more, making the prisoners panic. One of them immediately rushes out, shouting that they will bring the warden. The rest of the prisoners help 589 to his feet as he glares at him, vowing that he won't let this slide next time. He sighs, knowing that's just something 589 has to say. A moment later, back in their cell, 172 excitedly asks when he ever learned that technique, saying it was truly amazing. Then, 172 suddenly notices something strange and asks if he has always been that tall, because he remembers him being about his height. He dismisses the observation, telling 172 to keep hoisting those stones. 172, confused, asks if he really believes lifting stones will make him taller. He guesses that synchronization must have converted his real-life stats into game stats after all. Even so, compared to his real body, this one still feels like a child's. However, the most important thing right now is the actual stat screen. Opening his status window, he sees his class, Magician, and his traits. Poison Immunity, Immortal Duelist, Tenacious Challenger, Champion's Noble Soul, and Archmage's Blessing. All of them are S grade. However, he also notices a penalty. His stats are reduced by 50 due to stunted growth. More importantly, he has no mana. He wonders if that's correct. Does he really have 0 mana? He knows that Zed Arahan was supposed to be a magician. He is an Arahan. So how on earth does Zed have no mana? And why did they give him such terrible stats and then transfer his consciousness into him? He repeatedly taps on the mana stat in disbelief before laughing. 172, watching, asks what the hell he's doing. A moment later, lying on his prison bed, he can't believe how awful this character is. He assumes that Zed was discarded by the Banpunira clan, but knowing the Arahan family, that isn't surprising. They are heartless, without a drop of empathy. Calming himself, he decides to check everything out slowly. Looking at his status window again, he at least finds some good news. Zed's strength, agility, endurance, and perception are all maxed at 100. Even though he has a stunted growth penalty, he knows that a body made of nothing but bones cannot possibly make full use of those stats. He guesses that the penalty might be overcome with physical training, but Zed's diet is terribly lacking. He then notices several traits he has never seen before. All of them are S rank. The ones he recognizes are those he earned through gameplay, like Poison Immunity and Immortal Duelist. He realizes that if Zed's mana weren't 0, he would be an absolutely overpowered character. Then, he notices the Archmage's Blessing trait and knows that it isn't just for show. Sitting up, he reassures himself that he will learn the rest in due time. More importantly, there must be ways to fix the mana issue. Just then, a soldier shouts for the prisoners to listen up. All those whose numbers are called must come forward. He is confused, but 172 sighs, already knowing what's coming. They're being taken out again. The soldier begins calling out numbers, and one by one the prisoners step out of their cells. The ones called are then chained and led away. Curious, he asks 172 who these people are. 172 responds that they are death row inmates, prisoners heading out for their final meal. He asks what a final meal is. 172 explains that they are allowed to eat whatever they want before they die. A smile forms on his lips. He has an idea. He then asks 172 what his name is. 172 realizes that they have only been calling each other by their numbers. He finally introduces himself as RIU and then asks for his name in return. With pride, he responds, Zed Arahan. He then asks RIU if he wants to get out of there, which confuses RIU, making him ask what he means. RIU then tells him that he was not planning on staying there for long and that he has his reasons for leaving. This makes him ask RIU if he has thought about how to escape. RIU responds that the only exit is the front gate and that the warden has the key. He then asks RIU if that means they have to take down the warden to snatch the key. But RIU just asks if he is out of his mind and reminds him that the warden might be retired, but he is still a 5-circle knight. He knows that Warden Clark is the epitome of a knight filled with hatred for magicians, and in the last Savior Universe game, knights and magicians despise each other. He then wonders if he can even win against Clark now, and thinks about another way. RIU then tells him to just steal from Clark, which confuses him. RIU then explains that people from the streets learn how to pick pockets before they learn manners. But there are always too many eyes around Clark, so there is rarely a chance. He then thinks for a moment while RIU playfully plays with his hands. He smirks and tells RIU that it just so happens he is starting to get an idea of how they can escape. The next day, the soldiers shout to the prisoners that the work has begun and inform them that under the warden's orders, the workload is being ramped up even more. From today, they should not walk but run, shocking the prisoners, who complain and ask how many times they have to do it, urging the soldiers to keep the workload manageable. The soldiers ask if they are rebelling against the warden's orders. One of the prisoners, pissed off, complains about the soldiers, but a soldier immediately aims his sword at his neck and explains that he is just passing on the warden's orders, so if he has a problem, he should take it up with the warden. The prisoner panics, asking if this is not going too far and demanding to know the reason for all of it. The soldiers exchange glances before one of them peeks to the side and stares at Jin-ho, asking if they still do not know whose fault it is. The prisoners then turn to look at Jin-ho in complete silence. The soldier clears his throat and walks away, saying he needs to step out for a quick smoke. RIU worriedly informs Jin-ho about the bad mood around him, but he just tells RIU to stay away from him. He knows that Clark is openly inciting a riot. Since Clark cannot do it himself, he is trying to use the prisoners to kill him. He cannot believe that the so-called honorable knight of all people is pulling such stunts. He sees RIU successfully run away while still looking at him and realizes that even Clark is in on it. But he swears that he will not let it slide like yesterday because he cannot let Zed die. The prisoners angrily approach him, thinking that they have to kill him, otherwise they are as good as dead. He smirks and tells them that he understands where they are coming from and that it is just an unavoidable situation, which pisses the prisoners off. They all rush at him, shouting, asking if he is still putting on airs about Arahan even now, saying that he is typical of a Banpunite. He knees one of the prisoners near him in the chin, surprising the others. The prisoner then slams down on the ground, and he asks them if he was not right that he cannot just let himself die either. The prisoners think that he has lost it, but he calmly tells them that he has been needing somewhere to vent his anger, so this is good. The prisoners ask if he has gone nuts, thinking he is going to die. They then walk closer to him slowly, but he just smiles and positions his fists in front. He waits for them to get closer, and when they all charge at once, he kicks the first prisoner away from him, then kicks the second prisoner twice while remembering that he once dreamed of this in the Octagon. He wishes they would stop attacking one by one and just go all in at once. He then elbows a prisoner in the side and kicks another one in front of him, shouting that this is the thrill he wants. He remembers that they always said they wanted to fight as many opponents as possible and challenges the remaining prisoners to go all out and charge aggressively. He immediately looks to his side and dodges a prisoner's punch, then elbows him in the chin. He then rushes toward another prisoner, punching him in the face, then drives a punch into his stomach before hitting another prisoner in the chin, the fourth in the side of the face, and the fifth with a double punch to the chin. On the other hand, Ryu is watching from afar while hiding in a pile of stones. He is amazed and wonders what he is looking at right now. However, someone calls Ryu from behind. When he looks back, he sees that it is 589 ordering him to come over for a minute. Meanwhile, Jin-ho is still busy beating the prisoners around him. When the others realize they have no chance of winning against him with their fists, they take out their knives and charge all at once. He dodges one of the prisoners trying to stab him from the side and punches him in the face. He then ducks down to dodge the other knives aimed at his face and punches a man in the chin, making him let go of the knife he was holding before collapsing. Jin-ho feels the exhilaration when he dodges an attack and the thrill when he lands a solid hit. He knows that he is addicted to this rush, which is why he got into martial arts. He then punches a prisoner near him and shoves another prisoner trying to stab him, but he wants more. He is enjoying beating the prisoners who are trying to kill him. Then, someone steps forward and calls out to him. Jin-ho looks back after making another prisoner collapse and sees prisoner number 245 warning him that it would be better if he stopped rampaging and just died because friends are precious. At the same time, 589 is holding Ryu tightly, while Ryu struggles and calls out Jin-ho's name. Prisoner 245 then asks if he does not agree. Jin-ho smirks and calls them trash, telling them that they have made a huge mistake now. Yet, 245 laughingly tells him that all he has is that mouth, and that he should consider it an honor that he is even giving him the time of day since he is a two-circle knight. 245 then jumps toward him, calling him a pathetic Arahan with no mana, and launches the knife at him while shouting that he is only going to meet his doom. However, he just calmly waits for the knife to get closer. At high speed, the knife pierces the ground, because he has disappeared. 245 immediately pulls the knife out in surprise, asking where he ran off to. But then he is shocked when he sees 589 collapsed on the ground and Ryu freed within mere seconds. 245 shouts, demanding to know what he has done, and insists that he cannot use magic. He calmly replies that it was not magic. Then, spreading his feet, he rolls around, moving smoothly as if dancing. 245 is stunned when, in just a second, he appears right in front of him, landing a perfectly 360 spinning kick, slamming him to the ground, instantly knocking him out. However, he suddenly hears Ryu stutter, mentioning the chief. He looks back and sees Clark approaching with other soldiers. Clark calls his name and orders him to explain himself. Ryu rushes forward, explaining that he was the victim, adding that they even took him hostage in an attempt to kill him and that it was all self-defense. Clark frowns upon hearing Ryu's explanation and calls the swarm of prisoners stupid bastards. He then asks if he unleashed his mana, but he simply shrugs and replies that he wonders as well, which pisses Clark off. Clark then releases a strong aura, forcing everyone to their knees with its overwhelming pressure, making it hard for them to breathe. Ryu falls under its force as well, yet he remains standing, which shocks Ryu. He wonders why he is not affected by Clark's aura, knowing that no ordinary person can withstand the aura of a five-circle knight. He questions what is going on until a panel appears before him, revealing that his champion's noble soul trait resists suppression. He wonders if this is a resistance or a mental immunity trait. Smiling, he realizes that this is an absolutely outrageous ability, but he expected nothing less. After all, he has reached the pinnacle in his world, and there is no way a half-baked five-circle amateur like Clark can hold him down. Clark is surprised that he remains standing and unaffected, even without unlocking his mana, which only infuriates him further. Thinking of him as a worthless half-wit, Clark inhales deeply, gathering even more force, and then releases his full aura, causing the ground to shatter. Those who are not strong enough collapse to the ground in pain, yet he still remains standing, his champion's noble soul continuing to resist it. Smirking teasingly, he wonders what Clark is going to do now. Clark cannot believe what he is witnessing and demands to know what is happening. Even the soldiers, struggling in pain, beg Clark to stop. Listening to his men, Clark finally suppresses his aura and stares at him, thinking that it is a good thing he managed to control himself. He had almost lost it and swung his sword in anger. Clark then turns around and orders the prisoners to get back to work. However, he stops Clark and tells him that he actually has something to say. Clark peeks back and asks what it is. He responds that he is sick of stacking those stone towers and fed up with constantly worrying about when the prisoners will attack him. That is why he has decided to just end it all. Ryu, confused, asks him what the heck he is saying, but he continues, telling Clark that he will become a death row inmate. Clark is shocked and asks if he even understands what that means. He then warns him that if this is just a momentary whim, he will pretend it never happened. However, he asks Clark if he is worried that he might backtrack and insists that they should record it on the crystal ball. Clark responds that there is no better proof than that. Excited, Clark calls for one of the soldiers to bring the crystal ball quickly. He then reminds Clark that it is said death row inmates can have whatever they want for their final meal, and he has already decided on his menu. He adds that for his last supper he wants Verity beef, but not just a small portion. He wants a huge portion, enough to eat his fill. The soldiers are stunned, unable to believe what they just heard, knowing how incredibly expensive it is. Verity beef is the highest quality beef, naturally raised on the Verity Prairie in the Southern Empire, and one of the most prized dishes in Lase, the Last Savior game. It is so delicious that it can restore lost strength, and eating it might even turn the tide of battle. There is even a quest where players bribe NPCs with it. Jin-ho knows that he has an important fight coming up, so he should stock up while he can. Besides, he wouldn't mind tasting how incredible it is at least once. He then asks Clark if that isn't only fair, considering it costs his life. He adds that he only deals with S-rank items and warns them that if they try anything funny, he will nullify everything. Ryu, shocked, asks him why he wants to be on death row, making Jin-ho realize that Ryu is standing next to him. Without hesitation, he tells Clark that Ryu is coming along too, and that they should prepare enough for 2 people to gorge themselves. Ryu is both confused and stunned. Clark agrees and orders the soldiers to make it happen, surprising them, but they all reply with a reluctant yes, since they have no choice. Clark then explains to his men that when it comes to taking an Arahan's life, they owe at least that much. Jin-ho smirks and tells Clark that it's nice when they actually get along, leaving Ryu without a chance to process it all, only able to ask what will happen with his suggestion. The Verity beef takes a week to procure due to its rarity. During that time, Jin-ho does not step away from his work. Instead, he is served by the wardens while he continues training. Ryu sighs in frustration, unable to believe that even when he is on the brink of death, he still finds time to exercise. However, Jin-ho ignores him, thinking about the special system in Lase. He knows that if even one of his stats reaches 100, all experience points shift to his remaining stats. Since all of his stats except mana are already maxed out, any experience he gains now will only increase his mana. A soldier then calls for them. Jin-ho calmly stands up and asks if it has finally arrived, while Ryu panics, shouting and asking if this means his life is ending too. The finest preparations of Verity beef are presented before them. Ryu, overwhelmed, grabs a whole piece of perfectly cooked beef, tears forming in his eyes as he eats it in pure delight. He exclaims that he has never had anything this delicious in his life. Jin-ho reminds him not to forget that it is all thanks to him. As he eats, Jin-ho realizes that beyond its amazing taste, the performance boost it provides is top tier. Panels continuously pop up before him, showing that some of his penalties have been partially eased. He keeps eating, feeling as though all the experience that had been blocked is now pouring in at once. Smiling, he knows that his first objective has been achieved. Now, he can proceed to the next step of his plan. Meanwhile, in the chief's office, a soldier reports to Clark that the feast has begun. Clark nods and orders the soldier to ensure that no one gets near it. As he sits in contemplation, Clark wonders what exactly happened that day. There was no sign of forced restraint, yet something about the entire situation felt completely off. Even though he is retired, he is still a 5-circle knight, meaning there should be no way a young magician who hasn't even unlocked his mana could withstand his aura. He looks down at his glowing bracelet, a nagging suspicion forming in his mind. Something went terribly wrong that day. This time, he swears he will get proper confirmation. Minutes later, Jin-ho and Ryu finish their meal. Ryu burps loudly and sighs in satisfaction, saying that he feels like he won't have any regrets even if he dies now. However, Jin-ho responds that they cannot die just yet. Feeling completely full and energized, he can sense his entire body brimming with strength. He guesses that he could probably hit a punching bag all day long and finds himself eager to test his newfound power. Just then, the door swings open. Both Jin-ho and Ryu turn to look. Jin-ho asks if Clark has finally arrived. Without hesitation, he tells Clark that the food is already gone, wondering what comes next. Clark approaches them, calling his name. Smirking, Jin-ho teasingly asks if Clark is sulking because he didn't get his share. He watches Clark confidently, his expression unreadable. Clark reaches him, the glowing bracelet still on his wrist. A smirk forms on his lips as he meets Jin-ho's gaze. For now, Clark swears, he will make sure that wretched face of his succumbs to agony. Clark knew he came from the most elite magical family, which meant that even a tiny piece of intel could yield a huge profit. Depending on the quality of the information, they might even be able to leave their secluded corner. His bracelet suddenly released a wave of magic power, slowly crawling around him. Without hesitation, he fully unleashed the magic inside the bracelet along with his aura, making Jin-ho realize it was a powerful magical tool. Clark smirked and teasingly asked what he thought of it, adding that not even he could survive against it. However, to Clark's shock, Jin-ho remained completely calm and unaffected. Ryu stumbled in pain, struggling to breathe as he grabbed Clark's coat to steady himself. Annoyed, Clark forcefully pushed him away before directing his aura at him, intensifying the pressure. Ryu gasped, barely able to withstand the force. Jin-ho, still unfazed, called out to Clark and ordered him to control himself. Clark's anger flared even more. He focused all his aura on Jin-ho, calling him a cocky little bastard. Yet Jin-ho only smirked, standing firm thanks to his great-ass champion's noble soul. Frustrated, Clark refused to back down. He grabbed Jin-ho's shoulders and forced even more aura into him. Jin-ho merely sighed, brushed Clark's hands away, and stood up, reminding Clark to take it easy. Clark was surprised. Jin-ho added that if he wanted to kill someone, he should have them executed properly and stop whining like a little brat. Clark was speechless. His magic tool, his aura, none of it had any effect. It made no sense. If his mana had no impact, that meant Jin-ho's power was at least 1 circle above his own. Was Jin-ho a 6-circle magician? Impossible. It couldn't be happening. Then, Clark noticed Jin-ho's bloody red eyes and questioned whether it was the power of the Arahan bloodline. A 5-circle knight like Clark had honed his abilities over a lifetime, yet he couldn't even make a fledgling magician bow before him. Slowly, he accepted the truth. He couldn't overpower Jin-ho. As he calmed himself, he deactivated the magic tool. Jin-ho asked if he was done with his futile attempts. Clark remained silent, turning away, and reminded them that the execution would proceed at dawn, adding that even he, the magnificent Arahan, could not ignore the law decreed by the Imperial Majesty. He told him to enjoy his final night. Later, in the warden's office, Clark busied himself writing a report. However, he paused, realizing he still hadn't figured everything out. He guessed this information might be valuable intel for active nights, so he recorded the day's events. Yet, exhaustion weighed on him. Having pushed his mana to the limit and used his magic tool at full power, Clark was utterly drained. Though he wanted to finish his report, fatigue overtook him, and he drifted into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, in the cell, moonlight streamed through the barred windows, waking Ryu from his rest. Jin-ho asked if he was awake and how his body was feeling. Ryu groaned, saying he felt nauseous, like he was going to vomit. Jin-ho grinned, saying he had quite a skill with his hands. Ryu chuckled confidently, revealing a set of keys hidden in his sleeves. He proudly showed them and asked what Jin-ho thought of his skills. Jin-ho smirked, nodding approvingly, knowing that for a normal person, it would have been pretty dangerous. But Ryu was surprisingly resilient. Ryu explained that it worked because Clark had been completely focused on Jin-ho and asked if he was really okay. Jin-ho reassured him that he was fine. However, Ryu wasn't convinced, insisting that something was off, but there was definitely something he wasn't telling him. Jin-ho dismissed it and told Ryu to keep lifting more of those stones to get stronger. He then checked his stats and noticed something remarkable. His strength, agility, and endurance penalties had decreased by 10 points. It was an incredible result, exactly as promised. He could feel the difference in his body, and it was satisfying. He wished he could remove all the penalties quickly, but he knew that was unlikely. He then sat down and told Ryu that they needed to head out that night. Once Ryu had recovered enough, they would leave. Ryu hesitated, asking if they really had to go right away, and warning that Clark would notice any minute. But Jin-ho only smiled, assuring Ryu that Clark was probably passed out by now, so there was nothing to worry about. Still unconvinced, Ryu pressed him on how he could be so sure. Jin-ho explained that Clark's bracelet was such a coveted item that even he couldn't recall its exact name, but he knew it amplified mana instantly, while also piling on an immense amount of fatigue. There was no doubt in his mind. Clark had likely passed out somewhere by now. That realization made everything so much easier, especially since Clark had shown up at the feast room with the key and had even used the magic tool. Minutes later, Jin-ho told Ryu it was time to move. Ryu, still apprehensive, asked if he was really sure. Jin-ho replied that if he was scared, there was nothing he could do about it, which surprised Ryu. Frustrated, Ryu shouted that Jin-ho had to stick with him because he was his sidekick. Looking at the stolen keys, Ryu then pointed out that there was no room key among them and asked what they should do. Jin-ho told Ryu to take a step back from the gate for a second. Confused but trusting him, Ryu followed his instruction. Without hesitation, Jin-ho kicked the cell door open. Ryu stood frozen in shock, staring at the broken door before asking what kind of power that was and whether Jin-ho was really a magician. Jin-ho said nothing and simply walked out of the cell first. The noise alerted the guards, who rushed over in a panic. They immediately demanded to know what Jin-ho was doing. But instead of answering, he casually asked them back what else he should be doing there. The guards quickly realized what was happening and shouted that it was an escape. One of them immediately ran to report to Clark. While the guards inside scrambled to wake Clark, Jin-ho and Ryu rushed toward the main gate. As they ran, Ryu suddenly warned him to look ahead. Jin-ho turned his gaze forward and saw soldiers blocking the exit, their swords drawn. The soldiers shouted that they must stop them at all costs. Jin-ho yelled for Ryu not to stop and to keep running. Without hesitation, he leaped forward. Ryu responded that he understood and dashed straight toward the soldiers in front. One of them swung his sword, attempting to cut Jin-ho down, but he effortlessly dodged the attack. Jin-ho then launched his hand forward, grabbing the soldier's face before forcefully throwing him toward the others blocking the path. The soldier crashed into two others, sending them all collapsing to the ground, which left the captain in shock. The captain locked eyes with Jin-ho, but before he could react, Jin-ho's hand was already close. He struck the captain's neck, making him scream in pain. Without pausing, Jin-ho dashed toward the soldier he had thrown earlier, kicking him aside and sending him crashing into two more soldiers who were trying to help. He then continued his charge toward the remaining four. One of the soldiers attempted to slice him down, but Jin-ho swiftly ducked under the blade. In one fluid motion, he rolled midair and kicked the soldier's head in the process. The soldier collapsed instantly. The second soldier lunged forward, aiming to stab him. Jin-ho moved at an incredible speed, dodging to the side before planting his hand on the ground for balance. Using his momentum, he kicked the soldier's face, sending him crashing down. Landing perfectly back on his feet, Jin-ho immediately looked back. Two soldiers were rushing at him at the same time. He cursed under his breath but grinned with excitement. In an instant, he delivered a powerful kick to both of them simultaneously, knocking them out cold. Ryu, watching from a short distance, stopped for a second in sheer disbelief. The display of strength was insane. A moment later, Clark finally arrived at the scene, his face frozen in shock as he took in the sight of his soldiers. The men in charge of guarding the prison that night lay collapsed on the ground, most of them severely injured. One of the remaining soldiers weakly apologized, reporting that prisoners 218 and 172 had escaped. Clark's gaze shifted toward the wide-open main gate. His shock quickly turned into fury. Without hesitation, he shouted at the top of his lungs, ordering all his soldiers to get Jin-ho immediately. Meanwhile, in Motama village near the detention center, Ryu was hiding while scanning the surroundings. Slowly lifting the lid of a barrel, he whispered that he thought Clark had completely lost them, letting out a sigh of relief. Jin-ho then asked Ryu where they were, to which Ryu responded that they were in a small town called Mota, the only village near the detention center. Jin-ho asked if he was right in thinking that the guards would come there first, and Ryu admitted that they couldn't help it. The other towns were too far away. However, if they blended in with the locals, they should be safe. Ryu then began rummaging through an old clothes box. Jin-ho told him that he would follow his lead for now, but asked what exactly he was looking for. Ryu handed him a torn and tattered shirt, saying it was perfect for him, and that he should put it on. Jin-ho scoffed, saying it was exactly the kind of trash a bum would pick up. Ryu, however, explained that the village was swarming with beggars, and disguising themselves as one was their safest bet. Minutes later, after changing out of their prison clothes into ragged outfits, Ryu told Jin-ho that he would go fetch some necessities, and that Jin-ho should stay put like a rat, completely still. Jin-ho questioned how Ryu was planning to do that without any money, but Ryu only grinned, raising his hand confidently, and asked why he would need money in the first place. That made Jin-ho realize that Ryu's way of thinking was completely different from his own. Before leaving, Ryu reminded him not to go anywhere, emphasizing that he was his sidekick, and Jin-ho simply nodded. 2 hours later, Ryu returned, and Jin-ho asked what he had managed to get. Ryu revealed a pair of colored lenses, and instructed him to put them in, covering his red eyes. Jin-ho asked if that would be enough, and Ryu nodded, reminding him that red eyes were a symbol of the Arahan bloodline, and that he needed to be cautious. Ryu then informed him that in the southern region, under the Bahal clan's domain, blue lenses were all the rage among the aristocracy. To them, eye color was just another accessory. Jin-ho immediately recognized the name Bahal, as his main character in the game was Torres Bahal, the figure he used for the final ending. In the magical world, Arahan represented the peak of sorcery, while Bahal dominated swordsmanship. True to the world's lore, the two clans despised each other, and their eye colors were exact opposites. He thanked Ryu for paying attention to the details, which Ryu accepted, then mentioned that he had found a good hiding spot on the way back and suggested they take a short break there. A moment later, deep in the night, they lay down inside a stable hidden in the dark forest. Though exhausted, Jin-ho couldn't sleep, lost in thought about how he had ended up in this situation. When he first opened his eyes, it was as if he had suddenly been transported into a game. And now, he was forced to sleep in a stable while hiding from pursuit. Despite everything, he found it thrilling. Yet, he couldn't shake the question of why Ryu kept sticking to him, calling him his sidekick, even when Clark was targeting him. Being with him was dangerous. He still didn't know much about Ryu and assumed he was just a street kid and a pickpocket. Though he needed Ryu's help for now, he wondered if he could really trust him completely. What he didn't realize was that Ryu, lying beside him, was still awake. The next morning, Jin-ho woke up cursing when he saw the mess around them. Mud and manure were everywhere, and in the darkness of the previous night, he hadn't noticed it. He muttered in disbelief that he had actually slept in a place like this. Ryu, sitting up while yawning, sarcastically remarked that it must be uncomfortable for an elite noble. Jin-ho asked if people actually liked living in such conditions, but Ryu only asked back if he really thought people chose to live like that out of preference. He explained that people simply settled where they could afford to survive. Jin-ho stood up, determined not to endure another night like that. He declared that he needed to start making money because, at the very least, they needed to eat. Ryu scoffed, asking how he planned to do that while still avoiding the warden's eyes. He jokingly suggested that Jin-ho should learn a bit of pickpocketing while he was at it. Jin-ho dismissed the idea immediately and instead told Ryu to take him to the place he had mentioned. Ryu was confused, asking which place he meant, and Jin-ho responded with a single word: the arena. Later, in the underground arena, two men stood on the stage, locked in an intense head-to-head battle. Jin-ho smirked as he watched them, while behind him, Ryu nervously scanned the surroundings. The crowd around them erupted in excited cheers, prompting Ryu to whisper nervously that he thought they had come to the wrong place. However, he assured Ryu that they were exactly where they needed to be. Their attention turned to the fight, where the black guy bit Ikas. Ikas retaliated with a punch to the black guy's face, but the black guy blocked the next strike. Undeterred, Ikas continued his assault, landing a powerful blow to the black guy's side, cracking a bone. The audience roared, urging the fighters to give it their all, as they had bet heavily on the match. Meanwhile, he watched silently, initially expecting a sloppy street brawl. To his surprise, the fight was far more skilled than he had anticipated. Ryu, on the other hand, grew increasingly anxious, glancing around and stammering that the place was terrifying and they should leave immediately. Ikas charged forward, delivering a brutal punch to the black guy's face, causing his nose to bleed and his head to tilt helplessly. Ikas didn't relent, repeatedly striking his opponent's face. Ryu, unable to look away, whispered worriedly that killing someone here meant nothing, and that Ikas was far stronger than the carrion convicts. Ryu added that trying to handle Ikas with the neck grab technique was hopeless. However, Ryu's confusion turned to shock when he suddenly disappeared. The crowd gasped as Ikas froze mid-strike, his fist caught in Jin-ho's grip. Jin-ho calmly asked Ikas if he hadn't noticed his opponent was already knocked out and advised him to take it easy. Ikas was taken aback, while Ryu stared in disbelief, wondering why Jin-ho had climbed into the ring. Jin-ho turned to the man at the side, asking if he was the referee and if he had been bribed. He questioned why the match was still ongoing when the outcome was clear and whether there were any rules at all. Ikas yanked his hand free and demanded to know what Jin-ho was thinking, sarcastically suggesting that if he were a noble, he'd be even more troublesome. Jin-ho simply asked if Ikas couldn't tell by looking at him, then declared with a smirk that he was clearly just a street kid. The audience erupted in frustration, shouting at the lowlife for ruining their fun and demanding their money back. Unfazed, Jin-ho shouted back, telling the crowd to quiet down and promising to take responsibility. He confidently declared that he should be the one fighting Ikas and assured them they were about to witness something truly entertaining. Ryu, horrified, called out his name, pleading with him to stop. Ryu reminded him that Ikas' strength far exceeded his limits and that the entire atmosphere favored Ikas. The odds were 1 in 1,000, no, 1 in 10,000, and even the gods or the goddess of fortune couldn't tip the scales in their favor. Ryu begged him to fight someone else, insisting that Ikas was off limits. Yet, Jin-ho calmly told Ryu to quiet down and put all his faith in him. Ryu, even more shocked, asked if he was even listening, and if he planned to keep acting recklessly. Ryu shouted for him to quit and come down immediately. Jin-ho, unfazed, called out to Ryu, suggesting they feast on beef after the match as if there were no tomorrow. Ryu yelled back, telling him not to set any flags. A moment later, as the match was set to begin, the referee announced the start. Ikas noticed that despite Ryu's panic, Jin-ho remained calm and composed. Ikas was puzzled when Jin-ho positioned his fist forward, smirking confidently. Ikas observed that Jin-ho couldn't be more than 15, yet his gaze was sharp, his breathing steady, and his stance unlike anything he had seen before, threatening yet controlled. Ikas felt his body tremble and questioned why he was reacting this way. Was he scared of a lowlife like Jin-ho? Determined to end it, Ikas charged forward, but in an instant, he was pushed back by a single precise punch. Ikas staggered, his nose bleeding, as Jin-ho calmly explained that a punch shouldn't be pulled back behind the shoulders. Instead, it should be delivered from a guard stance, straight to the opponent's face, along the shortest, fastest, and cleanest path. Without hesitation, Jin-ho unleashed a flurry of punches, leaving Ikas helpless and unable to defend himself. Ikas was pushed back despite charging forward at full speed. Jin-ho planted his feet firmly and delivered a powerful blow, aiming to end the fight. The force of the punch sent Ikas' teeth flying from his mouth, leaving him severely beaten within mere minutes. The crowd was in disbelief, shouting in confusion, wondering who this underdog was and if Ikas was going easy on him. Meanwhile, Ryu stood with his eyes tightly shut, desperately calling upon the god of war, the goddess of fortune, the god of miracles, and the mother of life, begging them to ensure Jin-ho's safe return. When the chaos around him grew louder, Ryu cautiously opened one eye, only to see Jin-ho dominating Ikas without breaking a sweat. Ryu's jaw dropped in shock as he wondered what was happening. Was Jin-ho really winning? On the other side of the ring, Ikas struggled to focus, his vision blurry and his head spinning. He stared at Jin-ho, trying to make sense of the situation. How could this kid possibly be overpowering him? The thought infuriated Ikas, and with a burst of anger, he threw a desperate punch in Jin-ho's direction. He couldn't accept losing to someone so young, but Jin-ho effortlessly dodged the attack and countered with a series of precise punches. The audience grew frustrated, shouting at Ikas, demanding to know why he couldn't dodge such seemingly simple strikes. Jin-ho then channeled all his strength into one fist and delivered a final devastating punch, sending Ikas flying backward and slamming him onto the stage. Jin-ho turned to the referee, demanding to know what he was doing. Should they continue fighting without any rules? The referee hesitated but knew he had to act before losing his job. Stuttering, he raised his hand and announced that the match was over, declaring Jin-ho the winner. Jin-ho realized the fight had ended before he could even warm up properly. He thought to himself that he should have held back more. Later, in the back of the arena, Jin-ho confronted the coordinator, furious about the payout. He had been told the odds were 62-1, yet the amount he received was far less than expected. He accused the coordinator of trying to cheat him because of his age, insisting that the math didn't add up. The coordinator defended himself, claiming the calculations were accurate, but Jin-ho wasn't convinced. As he argued, he noticed Ryu looking away, sweating profusely. Jin-ho turned to Ryu and demanded to know how much he had bet. Ryu remained silent, which only angered Jin-ho further. He reminded Ryu that he had told him to bet everything. Unbeknownst to them, a woman had approached and was now standing nearby. Ryu stammered an explanation, saying he hated gambling and that they needed to save some money for dinner. This only infuriated Jin-ho more, prompting the coordinator to beg them not to cause a scene. At that moment, the woman greeted them. Jin-ho turned to see a lady accompanied by 2 massive bodyguards. She asked if she could have a word with them. Jin-ho, surprised, recalled the referee glancing at her earlier. He asked who she was, and the lady smiled, noting that his cluelessness suggested it was his first time at the arena. She introduced herself as Herna, the manager of the arena, and repeated her request to speak with him. Jin-ho, however, walked past her with Ryu, casually saying, "No thank you." Ryu glanced back nervously, recognizing Herna, but before they could leave the room, the 2 bodyguards blocked their path. Jin-ho warned them, asking if they wanted to end up like Ikas and suggesting they let him sleep it off for a few days. The guards, however, remained silent and unmoved, their loyalty to Herna unwavering. Herna stepped forward, explaining that the Ikas Jin-ho had defeated today was a champion she had scouted from the big city. She asked if he understood what that meant. Herna then warned him that she would let him go for now, but they would meet again. Next time, she said, they would talk in a more relaxed setting. She added with a smile that she truly loved strong people. Jin-ho stared at her for a moment, then turned and walked away with Ryu. Later, they arrived at a meat restaurant. Ryu was starving but warned Jin-ho not to act cocky in front of Herna, which confused him. Ryu explained that while Herna might appear to be just the arena's manager, she was actually the real power behind the city. As long as Jin-ho stayed there, he was bound to cross paths with her again. Jin-ho shrugged it off, saying Herna seemed like nothing more than a money-loving old fox, a nickname Ryu confirmed the locals used for her. Jin-ho knew Herna had approached him to exploit his potential, and it reminded him of his early days in the martial arts world. Back then, once he started gaining attention, he was bombarded with offers from managers who saw his talent as a tool for profit. He had been scammed multiple times before finally meeting his current manager, who had helped him become a champion. Jin-ho wondered how his manager was doing now. Thanks to those experiences, Jin-ho was no longer the naive kid from the provinces who could be easily manipulated. He had climbed his way to the top, enduring countless challenges to become a champion. He thought about Herna's reputation as an old fox and decided to bide his time, knowing that the more experienced player would eventually reveal their hand. When the waiter brought their order, Ryu's eyes lit up at the sight of what he thought was Verity beef. Just as Ryu was about to dig in, Jin-ho stopped him, explaining that the beef was fake. The color and marbling were completely off, which shocked Ryu. When Ryu asked what marbling was, Jin-ho explained that something was clearly wrong. He recalled that Clark, the warden, had taken a week to procure Verity beef, and if it could be sourced from a neighboring city, it wouldn't have taken so long. Verity beef was supposed to be exclusive, making it unlikely that the restaurant could serve it to all its customers. Jin-ho concluded that it was likely the lower grade Weiji beef, which, despite being just one grade below, was vastly inferior in quality. Ryu, still confused, argued that once the beef was in their stomachs, it wouldn't matter whether it was Weiji or Verity. He was too hungry to care. But Jin-ho called the waiter over, explaining to Ryu that if they paid for Verity beef and were served a fake, they had every right to demand what they paid for. As consumers, it was their right to set things straight, especially since they didn't have much money to begin with. The waiter, visibly irritated, told them to stop causing trouble and just eat their food. He pointed out that they had only ordered one serving and were wasting everyone's time. Jin-ho calmly but firmly stated that the beef was fake and that they had ordered Verity beef. He asked the waiter if they shouldn't serve what was ordered correctly. Jin-ho was annoyed that the restaurant was selling fakes and then acting arrogantly. The waiter retorted, asking if Jin-ho thought this was some street trick that only worked on the streets. Jin-ho smirked and told the waiter to stop talking and call the restaurant's boss. The waiter, now furious, muttered that the little punk had lost his nerve. Jin-ho simply smirked and said they could let the spineless punk run his mouth if he wanted, drawing the attention of other customers. The waiter, noticing the growing audience, angrily told Jin-ho to shut up and follow him. The waiter led them to the restaurant's boss, a large man surrounded by burly men holding butcher knives. The boss asked if they were unruly low-life customers causing trouble. Jin-ho replied that it was the boss who lacked manners by selling fake beef. The boss laughed loudly, saying he liked the guts of a young punk but warned Jin-ho to learn how to read the room. Jin-ho confidently raised his fist and told the boss that while he might not understand the vibe, the boss clearly didn't understand the situation. He asked the boss which side he thought would end up dead if they charged at him. This enraged the boss, who shouted that Jin-ho was about to learn a harsh lesson in life. He ordered his men to attack, and they lunged at Jin-ho. In a matter of seconds, Jin-ho dodged, countered, and incapacitated all four men. He punched the first man in the face, disarmed the second and broke his arm, swiftly knocked out the third, and slammed the fourth to the ground. The fight was over almost as quickly as it had begun. The boss, who had been arrogantly laughing moments earlier, now looked horrified as his men lay on the floor, severely injured. He shouted in disbelief, demanding to know what had just happened. Ryu, grinning, teased the men, asking if they knew who Jin-ho was. He proudly announced that Jin-ho was the one who had knocked out Ikas. The boss, who had initially laughed off the news of Ikas's defeat, now realized it was true. He nervously asked Jin-ho what he wanted. Jin-ho calmly explained that they were finally speaking the same language. He said he was a reasonable person and only wanted fair compensation. He laid out two conditions. First, the boss had to return the money they had paid, and second, from now on, the boss would provide them with Verity beef at the price of Weiji beef. The boss, stunned, shouted that they were acting like a bunch of thugs. A moment later, in a comfortable inn, Ryu lay on the soft bed, marveling at how luxurious it felt. He happily told Jin-ho that he had never slept on such a soft bed before, and declared it the best experience ever. Ryu added that Jin-ho's performance earlier had been amazing, something he would expect from a noble. Jin-ho, lying on his own bed, responded that if word got out about the restaurant's fake beef, it could ruin their reputation. For someone with no bargaining power, he explained, the negotiating table could be a nightmare. Ryu laughed, recalling the boss's furious expression, and thanked Jin-ho for their newfound comfort, saying he was living large. Jin-ho agreed and suggested they get some sleep. Hours later, Ryu stirred and opened his eyes. He sat up silently, whispering Jin-ho's name, but there was no response. Assuming Jin-ho was asleep, Ryu quietly put on his clothes and slipped out of the room, unaware that Jin-ho was still awake. A few days later, Ryu called out to Jin-ho, asking when they would eat because he was starving. Jin-ho was in the middle of doing push-ups, and Ryu remarked that he never seemed to take a break, always training non-stop. Ryu asked if Jin-ho was focusing on physical training because he had no mana, adding that magicians hated sweating more than dying. Jin-ho replied that it was for a similar reason, which confused Ryu. Jin-ho opened his status window, frustrated to see that his mana hadn't increased no matter how many times he checked. He began to wonder if he was cursed. He guessed that going from 0 to 1 mana might be like creating something out of nothing, meaning it would take time. Still, he knew the first point was crucial. and once he achieved it, his mana would likely grow much faster. Jin-ho told Ryu that his morning workout was over and they should go eat. Ryu asked where they should go and suggested potato salad or chicken stew. Jin-ho, however, said they should have beef for a change, which excited Ryu. They hurried to the beef restaurant. It had been 3 days since their last visit, and Jin-ho's reasoning was simple. They needed to avoid causing too much trouble. On their first visit, they had devoured 10 servings of beef, and with plenty of cash on hand, they had indulged. Jin-ho asked Ryu how much money they had left, and Ryu replied that there wasn't much. The city's high living costs were partly to blame, but Jin-ho knew that spending 50 gold coins in just a few days was excessive. He wondered if Ryu, coming from a noble background, was simply clueless about how the world worked. Jin-ho also began to suspect that Ryu might be pocketing extra cash, though he decided to pretend not to notice for now. He knew he couldn't let it go on forever, but guessed that if he understood Ryu's motives, he might be able to address the issue. Later, at the steakhouse, a man rushed to the boss to report that Jin-ho and Ryu had arrived. The steakhouse owner, FR, was a man with immense pride that far exceeded his means. He couldn't accept the humiliation he had suffered at the hands of a mere kid. FR asked his man if everything was prepared as he had instructed. Meanwhile, in the VIP room, the waiter respectfully guided Jin-ho and Ryu inside. The room was set up with a griller, uncooked meat, and seasoned cooked meat on the table. The waiter told them they had prepared plenty of meat and encouraged them to help themselves. Ryu was amazed and asked how much it all cost. The waiter bid them farewell, adding that they should call if they needed anything. Jin-ho wondered why the staff was suddenly so friendly. Ryu suggested it might be because Jin-ho had scared them enough, but Jin-ho wasn't convinced. As he had scoped out the place upon entering, he hadn't seen anyone suspicious, and the restaurant's interior looked the same as before. He couldn't figure out what all the fuss was about. Ryu wrapped a perfectly cooked piece of meat in lettuce and handed it to Jin-ho, saying it was a special wrap just for him and that he should eat it in one bite. Jin-ho thanked him and accepted the wrap. He decided they would need to keep a close eye on the situation, as careful observation might reveal what the restaurant staff was planning. However, as soon as he put the food in his mouth, he froze. The taste was off. Panicked, he shouted at Ryu to spit out the meat and not to eat anymore. Ryu, who had been stuffing his mouth with meat, was startled and confused. Ryu immediately spat out the food after Jin-ho explained that the meat was poisoned. Ryu forced himself to vomit, asking in panic if he was going to die. Jin-ho reassured him that a small amount wouldn't be fatal. He realized this had been their plan all along and couldn't believe they had the audacity to poison the meat. Staring at his absolute poison immunity, grade S trait, which resisted the frog's poison, Jin-ho thought about how, without this trait, he would have been taken down without even realizing it. He recalled unlocking the trait by consuming every poison in the Empire in ascending order of potency, while repeatedly using antidotes. All that suffering, he decided, had been worth it. Exhausted, Ryu asked how Jin-ho had known the meat was poisoned, as it had no taste or smell. Jin-ho simply replied that he was an Arahan, leaving Ryu in awe of how elite nobles operated on a different level. Ryu asked what they should do next. Should they run? Jin-ho scoffed, asking why they would run. Instead, he declared they would make the perpetrators pay dearly. FR stormed into the VIP room, irritated, and shouted that the beggars should have eaten their food quietly. He demanded to know who had given them the right to summon him. Jin-ho calmly stated that he wanted to clear up any misunderstandings and had a few questions. FR noticed the empty plates and assumed they had eaten their fill, but he knew that if they had consumed the frog's poison, the effects would soon take hold. FR angrily accused them of extorting money, but Jin-ho calmly replied that FR had the wrong idea. He suggested they talk things over with some good food and make peace. He pointed to the food Ryu was arranging. Ryu handed FR a meat wrap wrapped in vegetables and told him to eat it. FR stuttered, asking what this was, and Ryu calmly explained it was a peace offering. Jin-ho added that if FR accepted it, he would forget about the second condition from their previous deal, as they weren't actual criminals. FR, however, refused to eat it, stating he had no intention of making peace. Jin-ho asked if FR's refusal meant he wanted to keep paying them, or if there was another reason he couldn't eat the wrap, like it being poisoned. Jin-ho's smirk turned serious, and FR grew visibly afraid, though he denied the accusation. Jin-ho angrily told FR he had been enjoying the situation until now. With one hand, he pushed the massive table aside, startling FR. When FR saw the uneaten meat on the ground, he realized Jin-ho had noticed the poison. FR wondered how Jin-ho could have figured it out, as it seemed impossible. Jin-ho told FR he had planned to go easy on him, but now saw him as nothing more than trash. He demanded to know if FR had truly poisoned the food. FR tried to stay calm, insisting there was no poison and challenging Jin-ho to prove it. Jin-ho removed his colored lenses, revealing his glowing red eyes, and declared that this was all the proof he needed. FR froze, realizing Jin-ho was an Arahan. Jin-ho asked if FR had dared to deceive an Arahan and warned him he would pay with his life. FR collapsed to the floor, trembling in fear. Jin-ho added that someone like FR disappearing wouldn't even make the news. FR, consumed by terror, knelt and begged for mercy, apologizing profusely and claiming he hadn't known Jin-ho's identity. FR wondered why an Arahan from the western region would come to such a southern backwater and why Jin-ho had pretended to be a beggar. But fear overwhelmed any logical thought. He continued to plead for forgiveness. Watching FR sob like a child, Jin-ho realized the Arahan name carried far more power than he had imagined. This influence, he thought, could be useful in the future. Calming down, Jin-ho told FR that since he was being sincere, he would grant him mercy, this once. FR bowed repeatedly, swearing eternal gratitude and vowing never to forget Jin-ho's grace. Jin-ho laid out his conditions. First, FR was never to reveal his identity, a demand FR eagerly agreed to, even swearing on his deathbed and beyond. Second, FR was to hand over half his wealth, and Jin-ho would pretend none of this had ever happened. FR hesitated for a moment but quickly agreed, offering to fetch the money immediately. FR was deeply moved by the Arahan's apparent generosity, thinking to himself that money meant nothing to a dead man. He decided it was better to hand over the funds quickly before Jin-ho changed his mind. However, he froze when he heard someone approaching. Jin-ho immediately put his blue lenses back on. Ryu, excited, whispered that he expected nothing less from an Arahan, noting that FR didn't even dare make a sound. Jin-ho, however, remained focused, telling Ryu that once they got the money, they should leave the city that very night. Ryu agreed, saying it sounded like a good plan. Suddenly, a woman entered the VIP room and asked FR where he was rushing off to. Jin-ho was surprised to see Herna, accompanied by her bodyguard. She greeted him sweetly, remarking that they were meeting again. She added that he was far more impressive than she had initially thought. Jin-ho remained silent, wondering if Herna knew he was an Arahan and if FR had spilled his secret in such a short time. However, FR, noticing Jin-ho's reaction, shook his head repeatedly, signaling that he hadn't betrayed him. Jin-ho realized FR was genuinely terrified of him, which meant there was only one other place Herna could have gotten the information. He knew that if FR discovered he was merely a hollow shell of an Arahan, he would lose his money. It was time to change locations. Jin-ho turned to Herna and suggested they talk privately, to which she happily agreed. A moment later, in a private room, Jin-ho asked Herna why she was there and if she needed something from him. She replied that it was a misunderstanding. She hadn't come for him today but to meet her client. Jin-ho was confused until he saw Ryu's guilty reaction. Ryu apologized, and Herna explained that she wasn't trying to hide anything. She had looked into Ryu's request, but would need more money to proceed. Ryu stood up in shock, shouting that this wasn't what they had agreed on. He asked Herna if she knew how much he had already paid her, but she calmly replied that the amount barely covered one day's meal for her. She questioned whether Ryu really thought it was easy to find someone who had vanished without a trace, dead or alive. Ryu, on the verge of tears, stuttered that this was his last hope. Jin-ho finally understood what was going on. He suggested to Herna that they tie their matters together, surprising Ryu. Herna asked if Jin-ho meant that if she helped her client, he would agree to her request. She liked the sound of it and added that her request was simple. She wanted him to fight Ikas again. Ryu immediately objected, shouting that it was obviously a trap, but Jin-ho ignored him and accepted the rematch. He then asked Herna if she would proceed with Ryu's request. She licked her lips, agreeing and assuring him that she always kept her promises. Later, as they walked down the street in silence, Ryu carried a chest of money. Jin-ho asked why Ryu looked so downcast when they had made a fortune. Ryu apologized again, explaining that he hadn't meant to hide his actions initially. Jin-ho calmly replied that he already knew. Ryu admitted that he had secretly sought Herna's help, knowing it was stupid but feeling he had no other options. Jin-ho simply said he understood, and added that he had also noticed Ryu pocketing extra money. Ryu was shocked that Jin-ho had known all along. Jin-ho explained that he had only realized it when Ryu went to Herna. Ryu asked why Jin-ho hadn't said anything, and Jin-ho replied that he didn't mind because the help Ryu had given him was worth it. However, he warned Ryu that he couldn't let it slide forever. From now on, Ryu shouldn't hide things from him, and should be honest, as betraying trust was the most disgusting thing in the world. Jin-ho added that no matter where Ryu came from, he shouldn't let himself become trash. Ryu, tearing up, swore he wouldn't do it again. Ryu then urged Jin-ho not to go through with the rematch, suggesting they take the money and run as planned. Jin-ho asked about Ryu's brother's request, and Ryu admitted that he knew the truth. Herna was just going to scam them again. Ryu knew he wasn't dumb enough to fall for someone like Herna, but his desperation had driven him to her. Jin-ho realized Herna was the type of adult who preyed on desperate kids. He told Ryu he had initially planned to leave but had changed his mind. Ryu was shocked and asked if Jin-ho was really going to do the rematch. Ryu shouted that while he trusted Jin-ho's skills, Herna would have something nasty planned. Jin-ho replied that this was exactly why he wanted to do it, confusing Ryu even more. Jin-ho explained that when he saw trash, he liked to clean it up. Besides, beating an opponent who was giving their all was the best feeling. Meanwhile, at the Garrison prison, soldiers were busy assembling. One soldier reported to Clark that the troops were ready. Clark praised them and ordered the first unit to move out immediately. The soldier acknowledged the order. Clark, furious, slammed his fist on the table, breaking it, and cursed Jin-ho for hiding right under his nose. He swore to crush Jin-ho for good once he found him, shouting his name in rage. That's the end of the video. Let me know your thoughts and if you want the next part.